That's how it started. No warning. No conversation. Just polished leather sliding across mahogany, and then, Stella. One word. That's all it took to erase 10 years. My sister had been home for a week. 7 days. I'd spent a decade keeping their business alive, managing their health crises, holding everything together while they got sicker and the money got tighter. But none of that mattered now. Because Stella was home, and Stella was always the plan. My mother nodded. She didn't even look at me when she did it. Just this small, certain movement of her head, like she was confirming something that had already been decided months ago. Maybe years ago. Maybe my whole life. I should have been angry. I should have stood up and fought back, listed everything I'd sacrificed, every midnight crisis I'd handled, every inspection I'd passed, every disaster I'd prevented. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling this weird calm settle over me. Then I reached into my bag. I pulled out the power of attorney document, the one I'd signed on a vinyl hospital chair at 2 in the morning 3 years ago, and placed it on the table next to the house keys. The metal made this sharp little sound against the wood. Final. Clean. My father's eyebrows went up. My mother's mouth opened slightly. Stella just looked confused, like she wasn't sure if this was part of the plan or not. They all thought I was giving up. Surrendering. Finally accepting my place in the background where I'd always belonged. But here's the thing they didn't know. When Stella opened the letter I'd left for her that night, she couldn't even finish reading it. She got halfway through and started screaming. "You're joking. You're joking." She wasn't joking. And neither was I. Let me back up. Because to understand what I did, you need to understand how we got here. I grew up in hallways that smelled like antiseptic and lavender. My father owned 2 senior care facilities in Savannah, and from the time I could walk, I was there. Pushing wheelchairs that were too big for me. Standing on my toes to keep them straight while the metal rattled and shook. My father would walk ahead with these long, confident strides, greeting every resident by name, charming everyone. And I'd trail behind, invisible except when something needed doing. "Careful, Hazel," he'd call back to me sometimes, not even turning around. Then he'd go right back to impressing whoever was in front of him. Stella never trailed behind anyone. Stella floated. She had these dresses that swayed when she walked, curls that caught the light just right, and this laugh that made everyone stop and look at her. My mother loved photographing her, in doorways, beside holiday decorations, anywhere the lighting was good. She'd post them online with captions about our bright future and legacy in the making. I was in the background of those photos sometimes. Half cut off, holding a clipboard or wiping up something no one else noticed. Even as kids, the division was clear. Stella got dance shoes and summer camps and weekend trips to unlock her potential. I got responsibility. Hazel is independent, my parents told everyone, like independence was something I was born with instead of something they forced on me because it was convenient. When Stella complained about homework, they hired a tutor. When I brought home straight A's, my father barely looked up from his laptop. "Expected from you," he'd say. Like excellence was the baseline, not something worth celebrating. There was this one Christmas, I must have been 14. Stella got a new laptop for her creative projects. I got a used medical reference book and a reminder that I'd be covering the holiday shift at the facility because the regular staff deserved time with their families. The irony wasn't lost on me, even then. I spent Christmas Eve helping Mrs. Morrison write a card to her daughter who hadn't visited in 2 years, and I remember thinking we had more in common than I wanted to admit. I remember one birthday clearly. Stella's cake had sparklers and gold balloons and a dozen relatives crowding around her. Mine, 2 months later, was a sheet cake from the grocery store, half frosted and already leaning to one side. My mother kissed my cheek and reminded me to grab my work uniform before heading to the facility for an evening shift. I was 16. The shift wasn't required, but the mortgage was overdue. I didn't resent Stella then. She wasn't the one making the rules. She just thrived under them while I learned that wanting anything for myself made me inconvenient. So I stopped wanting. I filled medication drawers, folded towels, helped residents write holiday cards to families who'd forgotten them. I became the girl who solved problems quietly, whose usefulness erased the need for praise. By the time I hit my 20s, the pattern was set in stone. Stella left for the city to build a career in creative media, which mostly meant asking for money every few months. My parents always sent it. They talked about her dreams with this reverence, like she was doing something important. Meanwhile, my father's health declined. Then my mother's. The business started failing. Staff quit. Regulations got stricter. And suddenly, the daughter they'd invested all their hopes in wasn't the one they called. They called me. I signed the power of attorney at 2 in the morning in a hospital waiting room. My mother's hand was cold when she touched mine. "You're good with the serious things," she whispered. It wasn't a compliment. It was confirmation that I'd never been the daughter they showed off. I was the one they used. The first year after I took over was brutal. I was 24 and suddenly responsible for 93 residents, 42 staff members, and 2 buildings that were falling apart faster than I could fix them. I spent my days negotiating with suppliers who wanted payment up front and my nights teaching myself healthcare compliance law because we couldn't afford to hire anyone who actually knew what they were doing. I remember one particularly bad week when we failed a surprise inspection, lost our head nurse to a competitor, and had a sewage backup in the East Wing all at the same time. I handled it. I always handled it. But that night, sitting in my car in the parking lot at midnight, I called Stella. She answered on the 4th ring, music and laughter in the background. "Hey, what's up?" I opened my mouth to tell her everything, how exhausted I was, how scared, how much I needed someone to just acknowledge what I was doing. But before I could speak, someone called her name and she laughed that bright, carefree laugh. "Sorry, Hazel, can this wait? We're at this gallery opening and..." "Yeah," I said. "It can wait." I never called her like that again. Some nights, after 14-hour shifts, I'd catch my reflection in the facility's glass doors. Straight posture. Hair pulled back. Tablet in hand. I didn't look like someone in their 20s. I looked like someone who'd already lived an entire life and had nothing to show for it except exhaustion. That's when I understood what my family really believed. Stella was the face. I was the scaffolding holding everything up while she got to shine. The shift happened slowly. Like a storm building on the horizon while you're too busy to notice the sky changing. First, it was small things. Email chains about state inspections that suddenly didn't include my name. Then a meeting about succession planning that I only heard about because a nurse asked why I wasn't presenting the operational report. I remember standing in the supply room one afternoon, holding a box of wound dressings, when my phone buzzed. A photo from my mother, Stella standing in front of the facility sign, hair lifted by the wind, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Future Leadership." I stared at that photo until the screen went dark. Another message followed, an invitation to a family legacy celebration. Gold lettering. Fancy location. No mention of my role. No consultation. Just a card that appeared in my mailbox like I was a guest instead of the person who'd kept everything running. That evening, I walked into my parents' kitchen. The air smelled like roasted peppers. My father was talking to Stella about vision and ideas and the next decade. My mother leaned against the counter, nodding along. I stood there for a full minute before my father even noticed me. "Hazel," he said, distracted. "Don't worry about the administrative stuff right now. You've done enough heavy lifting. It's time for Stella to take on bigger responsibilities." Bigger. That word hung in the air. Stella stood there with her arms crossed, smiling politely, like she was preparing for a stage entrance instead of actual work. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mother reached over and touched my wrist. "You're good with the behind-the-scenes things," she said gently. Let her shine. Behind the scenes. Like I was a stagehand. Like 10 years of keeping them afloat was just background noise. That night, I found a folder on the dining table. Financial projections in Stella's handwriting. The numbers were wrong. Completely wrong. She'd projected a 30% revenue increase based on enhanced aesthetic appeal and social media presence. She'd budgeted for a rebrand and website redesign but had allocated nothing for the new medical equipment we desperately needed. She'd even suggested cutting staff hours to optimize efficiency, which would have immediately violated our licensing requirements and put our Medicaid certification at risk. But my parents had signed their initials in the corner anyway. They'd already decided. I sat down in that chair, and something inside me settled. Not broke. Settled. Like a foundation finally finding solid ground. And I smiled. I didn't argue that night. Didn't correct the numbers or remind them who'd been running everything. I just closed the folder, put it back exactly where I found it, and walked upstairs. In my room, I opened my tablet and started a new document. No emotion. No accusations. Just facts. I created a timeline first. 10 years in bullet points. Medical emergencies, regulatory crises, staffing shortages, the year we almost lost Medicaid support. Every single crisis I'd handled because no one else knew how. Then I listed the structural elements, licenses, compliance standards, vendor contracts, hospital partnerships. I wrote down the names of every person who relied on me, not my parents, not the family name, but me personally. Inspectors who trusted my reports. Physicians who approved our protocols. Case workers who called me when families panicked. The list was longer than I expected. 37 professional relationships I'd built from scratch. 12 vendor contracts I'd personally negotiated. 8 regulatory frameworks I'd implemented. All of it tied to my name, my reputation, my work. I didn't need to build a case. The case already existed. I just had to assemble it. The next morning, before sunrise, I drove to Dr. Hartley's office. He was my father's oldest friend and the only person who'd ever seemed to actually see me. When he opened the door, he didn't ask why I was there at 6 in the morning. He just stepped aside. I put my notes on his desk. He read them slowly, glasses sliding down his nose, taking his time with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me. "They're moving forward without you." I nodded. "And you're done asking to be seen?" Another nod. He tapped my timeline. "You don't need revenge, Hazel. You need structure." That afternoon, he called Ms. Keller. She was an attorney who specialized in nonprofit healthcare structures. She showed up with a leather portfolio and the kind of calm that comes from years of navigating systems people underestimate. She reviewed everything: contracts, emails, compliance logs, my power of attorney documents. When she got to the financial projections Stella had drafted, her lips tightened. "They're planning a transfer," she said. "But they don't understand what they're actually transferring." "Explain it," I told her. She pointed to the licenses first. "This is the real spine. Without these, the facilities are just buildings. Nothing more." Then she tapped the compliance protocols I'd written. "This is intellectual property. You created it." Finally, she held up the partnership summary. "This is institutional capital. It follows the system, not the family name." I sat very still, processing. "You can protect your work," she continued. "Not with emotion. With boundaries." We spent the next week building a legal framework, a nonprofit foundation designed to hold everything intangible. The brand. The protocols. The data systems. The partnerships. Not to own them, but to safeguard them. To create a structure that served the people in our care instead of my family's image. I called it the Beacon Ridge Foundation. A beacon built for people who needed steadiness. Under my authority as power of attorney, still fully valid, never rescinded, I executed each transfer with the precision of someone measuring medication doses. Every document signed, notarized, filed. My parents, believing it was routine administrative cleanup for their health and the business's stability, signed advisory roles without reading the fine print. No ownership. No control. Just recognition for their name. It took 3 weeks to complete. 3 weeks of careful documentation, of double-checking every clause, of making sure everything was airtight. Ms. Keller warned me that what I was doing was permanent. "Once this is done, there's no undoing it," she said. "Are you sure?" I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. When the work was done, I went back to operations like nothing had changed. I moved through hallways, checked logs, adjusted schedules. Staff greeted me with the quiet respect of people who remembered who'd kept them employed. Stella drifted through rooms with a notebook, offering ideas about color palettes for the website. My parents beamed every time she spoke. The night before the legacy celebration, I sat alone in my small office behind the nurse station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I opened one last document, a letter addressed to Stella. It wasn't angry. It wasn't meant to hurt her. It was just clarity. I explained what she was actually inheriting, a shell without the system. Responsibility without preparation. A title without the backbone beneath it. I told her about the foundation, not to shame her, but to prepare her for the truth my parents refused to see. I ended with one line, "What you carry next depends on what you choose to hold." I printed it, folded it neatly, and slid it into a red envelope. Red, because it needed to be noticed. On the day of the celebration, I put that envelope in my bag next to the keys and the POA document. 3 objects. 3 truths. This time, I wouldn't fix what they'd broken. This time, I'd let the system speak for itself. The celebration looked beautiful from the doorway. Soft lights, crystal glasses, linen napkins folded like origami. My parents stood near the head of the table, glowing in a way they hadn't in years. Stella sat between them, posture perfect, fingers grazing her glass stem like she'd been practicing. When my father tapped his spoon against his plate, the room went quiet. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, voice carrying easily. "We're here to honor the future of our family's work." He turned to Stella with a proud smile. "She's ready to lead." My mother nodded. "She deserves it." The words didn't hurt. They just confirmed everything I already knew. I waited until the applause faded. Then I stood, not abruptly, just enough to make people notice. I placed 3 items on the table. The keys. The power of attorney document. The red envelope. The keys made a small metallic sound that cut through the warmth of the room. My father frowned. "Hazel, this isn't necessary." I slid them toward Stella. "It's all yours." Some guests smiled, thinking it was gracious. Others exchanged glances, sensing something off. Stella reached for the envelope first. Her fingers traced its edge before she pulled out the letter. Her eyes scanned the first lines, then sharpened. She flipped to the next page. Then the next. Her breath caught. "What is this?" she whispered. No one answered. She kept reading, her hands tightening around the paper, knuckles going white. "No. This can't be right." Her voice rose, thin and disbelieving. "You're joking." Her chair screeched backward. The whole room jolted. My father grabbed the papers from her. His face drained of color as he read the section about the transfers, brand, protocols, operational rights, licensing agreements. All under Beacon Ridge Foundation. His fingers trembled. "Hazel, what did you do?" I didn't answer. My mother snatched a page, scanning frantically. This says we don't own any of this." "The facilities are buildings," I said quietly. "Just buildings." The room went completely silent. From the corner, Mr. Spencer, Beacon Ridge's attorney, stood up. He'd been sitting there the whole time, blending in until he was needed. His voice was calm. "Everything in that document is accurate. The transfers were executed 3 years ago, during the period when Miss Hazel Cooper held full legal authority to act on behalf of her parents." My father's voice cracked. "Without our consent." "With your signatures," Spencer replied gently. "You both approved the documents. We have medical verification and third-party oversight confirming the necessity." Stella looked from him to me, eyes wide. "So what did they just give me?" Spencer folded his hands. 2 aging properties and the debt tied to them. Anything operational requires certification from Beacon Ridge. Certification is contingent upon meeting the care standards Miss Cooper designed. My mother shook her head. "She can learn. She can meet them." Spencer lifted a single page. "If staffing ratios drop, if safety protocols lapse, if any core process deviates, Beacon Ridge can revoke the license within 60 days. Without a license, the buildings cannot operate." My father's voice dropped to a whisper. "So we have nothing." I didn't correct him. They had exactly what they'd always valued, appearance without structure. Stella sank back into her seat, the letter limp in her hands. All that confident posture from earlier, gone. Her shoulders folded inward. I thought I was taking over something real. I finally spoke. "You were. The system. The responsibility. The work. You just never saw it." Spencer closed his folder. "This arrangement protects the seniors and the staff. It's not punitive. It's structural." My parents stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time. Not as the daughter who'd carried them for a decade, but as the person who wouldn't do it anymore. I didn't offer comfort, didn't raise my voice. I just stepped back from the table and walked toward the door. The silence followed me out. I didn't sleep that night. Not from guilt, there was nothing to feel guilty about, but because the house felt different without the weight of their expectations pressing down on everything. My phone stayed dark. No alerts from staff. No crisis calls. No last-minute emergencies. The silence felt strange, like stepping into a room I didn't know existed. By morning, the consequences had started. I saw them from a distance, not because I was avoiding them, but because I didn't belong in that orbit anymore. Bank emails. Staff notices. Compliance warnings. None of it came to me. It all went exactly where the responsibility had been placed. I drove to the Beacon Ridge Center before sunrise. The windows glowed amber, reflecting the first light over the river. Inside, volunteers were setting up morning activities. Someone was tuning a piano in the rec room, and the notes drifted through the hallway like a quiet reminder that life kept going even when families fell apart. I walked into my office, small, plain, but mine. I set down my keys and exhaled. The breath dropped into the space like a weight finally being released. A week later, I saw my parents in a Medicaid waiting room. They sat together, hands clasped, staring straight ahead. They didn't see me walk by. I didn't stop. Not out of anger. Just because there was nothing left to fix. A month after that, during a site visit, I noticed Stella at one of the facilities. She was pushing a resident's wheelchair, movements careful and small. She looked different without the spotlight. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. She was actually listening to what Mrs. Coleman was saying, nodding at something I couldn't hear. She didn't notice me. I let her have that moment. Maybe she'd figure it out. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem to solve anymore. Some stories end with victory. Mine ended with space. Clean, quiet, earned. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anything that wasn't mine. No shouting. No slammed doors. No dramatic confrontation. Just a line drawn in the quiet. Families fracture loudly, but boundaries settle like dust, soft, inevitable, impossible to sweep away once you stop pretending you're the one holding everything up. Freedom didn't come from winning. It came from stepping aside without looking back. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing at all. And sometimes the silence that follows is the only truth that ever mattered. Thanks for listening, and if you liked this story, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about family, boundaries, and finding your worth when the people who should see it never will. The scaffolding was never meant to be seen, but it's the only thing holding everything up.